Here we go, introduction, take 3, and action.
Hey, I'm Will Morgan of WM Armory, and a while back I asked what sort of things that you would like to see in a tutorial, and the response was pretty much everything. So I've thrown together this tutorial to give you all the basics that you'll need for foam fabrication. First and foremost, safety. Number 1, make sure you have a well-ventilated area like a garage, patio, or a driveway. This creates a lot of dust and fumes that are pretty nasty. Speaking of dust and fumes, number 2, mask.
Because nobody wants cancer.
A lot of things you'll be working with create fumes and dust that are not good for you. Next, protect your eyes. The last thing you want is crap flying in your face. Gloves. A lot of the chemicals you work with are not good for your skin or just messy, like paint or a lot of adhesives. So these are always great to have. Lastly, protect your hearing. Some of the tools can be kind of noisy. Nothing that's really deafening, but it's still good to have these. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started. There are a few tools that are essential to foam fabrication. First up, the heat gun. You can purchase this at most any local hardware store. Pens or markers, I prefer Bic pens and I buy them in bulk because they go out pretty fast. A Dremel with a flex shaft. As far as bits go, I like sanding and grinding bits, the wood sanding bits, and get the finest grit possible that you can get. And lastly, X-Acto blades. Be sure to buy the blades in bulk because they will dull fast.
God damn it! Oh! Why? Why?
Sorry, I didn't see you there. I'm sorry.
Son of a...
That's why safety is important. Remember, don't throw your tools. There are a few other tools which I recommend that make life much easier, but are not necessary. A belt sander, a bandsaw, and a scroll saw. They'll really help you when cutting things, large shapes, so big circles, repetitive shapes, and when you're trying to sand and make clean edges on weapons or other pieces. So here's some of the tools I was talking about before that I recommend but aren't necessary. So here's the bandsaw, scroll saw and bandsaw, pretty similar except with the bandsaw you're going to get limited on the size of stuff you can cut because it's going to hit right here. But these are great for cutting out small shapes or rounded edges, and it's just the edges are about as messy as a razor blade, so there's not that much to clean up. The scroll saw, you can actually change the angle of the cut and you can get larger pieces in there. Here is the belt sander. This I highly recommend much more over the bandsaw. This particular model has this piece which can adjust and flip down, this which can adjust, and then it has this wheel over here that can also adjust, and it has this, so you can get great angles on it, and this also adjusts here. So, these I highly recommend that you get or purchase if you intend on doing a lot of foam fabrication work. They are lifesavers and they are huge time savers. Next up we have adhesives. I prefer Barge. It's not that easy to come by, but if you can, I highly recommend it. It's magical. But remember, gloves and a mask because it's pretty potent. If you can't get Barge, you can try E6000. They're both applied the same way, except E6000 takes about a day to set, where Barge takes a few minutes. Other options include hot glue. It's what I first started using, and I still use for some things today, like strapping. And it's very easily accessible. Also had some people that have been successful with super glue. I haven't personally tried it, but there's no one right way to do things. So experiment for yourself, see what works best for you, but just remember, safety first. And now, for the most important part, the foam. I use 3 gauges of foam when I'm fabricating. The thinnest is a 16th inch thick. It comes in rolls and sheets. And then the medium thickness, which is about a 1/4 inch thick, comes in these little sheets. It comes in white or black. Same thing with the sheets and rolls. Both of those can be purchased at Michael's. For the sheets, it's about $1. For the roll, it's about $5. And then the thickest foam. It comes in 2x2 sheets, which you can buy online or at Lowe's. Now, when selecting your foam, the most important part is make sure it's not porous. You don't want many bubbles, and you want it to be as rigid as possible. The more rigid, the better it sands, the better it holds its shape, and the easier it is to work with. Next, we're going to talk about painting. Before you start painting, you want to make sure that your pieces are clean, free of dust, glue bits, strings from hot glue. You don't want any of that on there because that's going to affect your paint job. Mostly, I use spray paint. I use either Krylon Fusion or Rust-Oleum. And you want to make sure the Rust-Oleum says also bonds to plastic, and Fusion is meant for plastic. The reason for this is if you don't use a spray paint that bonds to plastic, it's going to want to flake off and crack, and then it's going to look like crap. First, we're going to start with our base coats, and it's best to go with flat colors. Be that white, black, gray, or brown are most common for flat colors. Also, make sure you're using the 4 plastic ones, Rust-Oleum and Krylon Fusion. Now, after several coats, you're going to wet sand. I have a partially used sheet right here, wet sanding paper, and you can buy that in packs at your local hardware store or your automotive store. Cut yourself out some little squares of this, get yourself a bowl, fill it with water, let it soak for a little bit, and then after every several coats, you're going to wet sand it once, go over it, and then you're going to let that dry, so there's no water on it, and you're going to wash, rinse, and repeat and do several coats. You're going to do this until you get kind of a plasticky feel on the foam, and the foam is no longer going to look like foam, it'll look like plastic, or like you cast it. There's a few cool techniques you can do with wet sanding. First off, if you base coat color, lighter color yellow, and you go over it with a darker yellow, and then you wet sand the edges, it's going to make those edges pop, and it's going to give it kind of a cool weathering effect. Also, you can do the base coat of silver, or any metallic color, and then do a darker color over top of that, like, say, black, and then you wet sand that, and it's going to give it a cool metal weathered effect and make the metal pop out on the edges. After you're done with the spray paint and you have any further details to paint, you can use Basics Acrylics. Literally, it's called Basics. You can get this stuff at most any art store. It's a pretty standard brand, and it comes in literally every color, including metallics. Lastly, clear coats. You want to protect your paint job after you're done with it. Both Krylon and Rust-Oleum have clear coats. Now, whether you want it to be a gloss shine or matte shine or satin finish, that's entirely up to you. But make sure that you don't overcoat with a clear coat, because then it's going to give it a milky finish, and that looks not good. So, make sure you give it a light dusting over the entire thing with your clear coat. And that's it for painting. So now I'm going to show you how to use Barge and E6000. They're applied essentially the same way, but I'm going to show you how to use Barge because I like that better. We've got our 2 pieces of foam here and our Barge. Now I like to put the Barge in a smaller container. You can get these in makeup stores, art stores will have these. It's much easier to apply than trying to do it out of the big old can here. So we've got our 2 pieces of foam, and then we're going to apply a thin layer to each using our little bottle here. I'm going to apply that. Nice thin layer on both sides. I'm just going to take another piece of scrap foam and smear that so it's a nice, even, thin coat. Kind of a little shiny look to it. Make sure you get that nice, thin, even coat. Just scrape your excess off the table. Alright, let that sit for a couple minutes or so. So right now you see it's got kind of a glossy, shiny look to it. You want it to be a dull, almost how it looks right there. Dull, flat look. Let that dry for a minute. Alright, now we've let our foam pieces sit for a while with the Barge on them. You can kind of see now how they've lost a lot of their shiny wet look, except for a couple little spots there. So what we're going to do is you want to start at one end. So say this top piece is going to be the outside where we're seaming it together. And then you want to slowly piece it together. Make sure it's all even. Press it. Now this is E6000. you would have to clamp this, which you really can't clamp foam, or just set something on top of it, and then come back 2 hours later, and it should be holding enough to where you can continue working with it, but it takes a full over 24 hours for E6000 to set, where barge, that's not coming apart, that's set. That's why barge is so much better if you can get a hold of it. So that is not coming apart at all. Now, after you've glued it, you see you have little glue pieces right here, and it might be a little uneven. So you can take this to your belt sander or take a Dremel to it and clean up the top before you paint. So you get rid of all these little pieces and any little edge or lip that you might have that didn't line up properly. And that is how you use barge in E6000. Alright, next I'm going to show you a cool little trick for getting detail in foam. You can see right here on the vents there. And then down here, and this little button here. To do that, all I used was an X-Acto blade, a big pen, and a heat gun. Now, I've got a little piece of scrap foam right here. I'm just going to draw some lines in this. Alright, and I'm going to take the X-Acto blade, and I'm just going to score the lines. Not go all the way through, just maybe about a 1/16 of an inch in, and then I'm going to go over that with the heat gun. Now make sure you don't hold it too close and don't hold it in one spot for too long. Just hit a little bit, come back, give it a second to cool down, do it again. See how that pops open like that. Now, if you have a corner and it doesn't get it all the way, you can go ahead and once this cools down, you can cut the corner again, hit it with the heat gun, and it'll pop open. So this is a great way for doing little details or weathering or little small, thin, clean lines. Next, I'm going to show you how I dish foam. For this, you'll need a bowl, foam, the heat gun. Now, when selecting your bowl, make sure that it's deep enough and that it doesn't have a very flat bottom. You want it to be very rounded. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take our heat gun, we're going to heat this up until it's flimsy and very malleable. Make sure you heat up both sides and the entire piece. Alright, now we've got our foam heated up. You can see how flimsy and malleable it is. We're going to take that, and we're going to punch that in the bowl. Now, I like to use the inside of the bowl because it helps form and shape it better than trying to hold it on the outside of the bowl, because then you're going to get an uneven shape. You're going to hold that in there for about 30 seconds to 60 seconds. You might want to use gloves with this because this can get pretty hot. Alright, so now that we've let that sit for a while, pull that out, and you'll see that will retain its shape. This is great for doing shoulders, or knees, or anything that's dished out, breastplates. Ta-da! And that's how I dish foam. Next, I'm going to show you an example of why I like wet sanding so much and what it does for your finished product. So this piece is actually all entirely foam. This is the Zaid mask that I did. You can see here, this all looks like one solid piece of foam, but actually, this is 5 pieces of foam that have all been glued together with barge, belt sanded to get a nice rounding to it, and then spray painted and wet sanded several times, doing several coats, to give it that finish. And to get the weathering on the yellow, I actually used 2 coats of yellow. I dusted with the darker yellow over top of the lighter yellow, and then I wet sanded that off. Show you the back here, it looks a little better. To give a better wear and tear look and weathering and aging to the yellow. I've also done the same thing on these little filters here, with spray painting them silver, dusting them black, and then sanding over that to let the high points in the silver show. Now, the undercoat that you want to show through a little bit, you want to do several coats of that and then dust lightly over top with the darker coat of either black or the darker yellow. And that is why I like wet sanding so much, an example of things you can do with wet sanding.
Hopefully, these little tips and tricks that I've shown you now will help you to foam fabricate whatever you hope to cosplay in the future. And furthermore, you can go here for foam, straps, and LEDs. Lastly, if you'd like to inquire for a custom piece or custom commission, please visit my website here or my Facebook here. Have a good one and happy cosplaying.